Metroid Other No, don't roll the intro yet. I need to explain myself.
So, DQP, what are you doing spending 5,700 words on a pretty bad game on April Fool's Day, you may be asking? I usually try to be a bit more positive in my YouTube channel, and I don't want to spend time being negative about video games, especially this game in particular. A lot of people don't like this game. This whole thing really just kind of started as a silly April Fool's Day idea, but it eventually kind of mutated and exploded into this giant, monstrous opportunity to really seriously talk about one of my video gaming white whales.
Because while some of you may see Other M as just another pretty bad game, it's always been something more personal to me. Some of you are probably thinking, oh, well, it wasn't as bad as Sonic 06 or Superman 64 or something. No, you're wrong. This game is infinitely worse. Sonic 06 and Superman 64 are pretty broken, but when they do work, you can kind of see where the developers were going with them. Other M is broken on a more fundamental level. You can always see where the developers were going, and where they were going was disgusting, offensive, and wrong-headed. This game shut the Metroid franchise down for 6 years, a streak that was only technically broken by Metroid Prime Federation Force, which could hardly even be classified as a Metroid game at all. Other M took one of the most iconic female protagonists in video gaming, a medium with so few of which to speak of, and threw her so thoroughly through the grinder that the public at large could no longer take her seriously. Nintendo is still recovering from that.
So, get yourselves comfy, because I'm about to spend the better part of an hour ripping this game to shreds. It's time to talk about Metroid Other M. Oh God, I've made a mistake. Where do I even begin? You know, let's just start with the nitpicky stuff that everybody likes to talk about before we really delve into the heart of what's really wrong with this game.
The controls for this game are not good. In this, Iwata asks, lead director Yoshio Sakamoto said, Metroid was originally a game for the Famicom, and so could be played using just the control pad and 2 buttons. Back then, the game had simple controls, move with the control pad and use the 2 buttons to jump and shoot. That's why I decided this time to make a game that used one Wii remote and didn't use the nunchuck. Even in a Metroid world that ended up being constructed in 3D, the player feels more affinity with Samus when controlling her with the D-pad, even more so than with the control stick.
Yeah, has Sakamoto been here since 1995? I mean, we've tried making 3D games work with a D-pad. It hasn't really caught on.
I mean, okay, I'll admit that I play most first-person games on either a keyboard with WASD controls or a Steam controller with WASD controls mapped to it, but Metroid Other M feels like it's making a lot of compromises to make this whole control pad and 2 buttons thing work. For one, the Wiimote's D-pad is really tiny. My left thumb was aching within minutes. Second, the player doesn't need to aim at enemies anymore. Samus just automatically targets them without any player input, which has worked in Metroid before, but Metroid Prime still gave players the responsibility to actually use the lock-on. Other M feels more like it's holding the player's hand. And this is nothing like the 2D games either. The careful positioning needed to land shots in games like Super Metroid and Fusion was a necessary part of the game's difficulty and gameplay. But now, Samus can just shoot at anything without a problem. Oh, but she still has to go into first person to use her missile. Okay, now we're getting to the big controller bugbear. In order to use missiles and the grapple beam, the player has to take this Wii remote that they're holding sideways and point it at the screen. This means that Samus has to stop in her tracks, which means that Samus is vulnerable, which means that what used to be an interesting combat tactic in the other Metroid games is now a massive inconvenience that the game sometimes forces down the player's throat. Now, I know what you might be saying. It's a cool mechanic when the developers design around it, and that could have been true. but they didn't design around it. Other M feels like it wants to be a Team Ninja style action game. That's what it looks like, and that's what it seems like it wants to play like with stuff like the sense move and the finishers. But again, we're playing on a control pad and 2 buttons. Dodging requires you to press the direction on the D-pad right before the enemy attacks you, but enemies don't do a very good job of telegraphing their attacks, so the best tactic is to just repeatedly tap the D-pad, inching around the battlefield, until you dodge, get your charge beam, and open fire. But sometimes an enemy will start glowing yellow, and you have to whip your Wii Remote out and point a missile at it. Enemies rarely give you a window to do so, meaning that you have to switch to the next tactic of moving a moderate distance away, then pointing the Wii Remote at the screen and firing your missile. Look, this ain't exactly Bayonetta. This isn't an action game with loads of depth. There are exactly 2 strategies to every encounter in the game, and both of them are an uncomfortable hassle. And all of this could have been fixed if we had something more flexible than a sideways Wii Remote. Like, even something as simple as a SNES pad means that we also get a dodge and a missile button, which could make combat much more fluid, even if using the D-pad in 3D isn't really fun.
But combat isn't everything that makes a Metroid game worth playing, you might be saying. Well...
Exploration is a key element of every Metroid game. Even the most linear games like Fusion and Samus Returns at least have some bonus items to find if you're willing to look. And unlike a lot of other Metroidvanias, the least useful finds are still at least an upgrade to your missiles or power bombs or something, and that can still be pretty useful. Other M does have exploration and hidden goodies, but they are worthless. They are all worthless. And the reason that they are all worthless is because of this. See, in previous Metroid games, and Samus Returns, you typically restore health and missiles by enemy drops, or at a recharge station or something. But enemies don't drop anything in Other M. If you lose a health point, that health point is gone forever until you reach the next save station. However, you can point the Wii Remote up at the ceiling and hold A to recharge your missiles to max capacity. And if you're below a certain threshold of health, you can also restore an E-Tank or a set of E-Tanks, depending on how late in the game you are. So, why bother collecting missile tanks or energy tanks at all if you can just reliably restore them easily mid-fight? Good question. Someone should have asked Team Ninja. Missile tanks are worthless. Energy tanks are worthless, aside from like the first 3 that you find, and so are the piece of heart energy parts that they introduce in this game. The only power-ups that truly matter are Excel charges and recovery tanks, and those are easy to find. The only reason to collect everything is to hear Samus say,
"Perfect. Congratulations,"
at the end item tally. That's it. There's no reason to go off, explore, and find all the missile or E-Tank expansions. And even if you do want to find them, just for completionist's sake I guess, the game just tells you where they all are late in the game, so what's the point in even exploring to find them? And I don't mean like Super Metroid or Metroid Fusion, where they tell you where some of the items are, but they're still tricky to find beyond that. Like, the power-ups in Other M are dead easy to find once the game tells you where they are. Even if you want to explore, there's still no real exploration. With that in mind, Other M is a completely linear game. Even more so than Fusion, which was already pretty linear by Metroid standards. And you know what? That can work sometimes if the storytelling is good enough.
I mean, come on, you know where this is going. So, let's recap the story of Metroid Other M for those of you who have not played this game, or if it's been a long time since you've played this game, and I understand if you've forgotten the story, it's a little hokey, so here we go.
After defeating the Mother Brain at the end of Super Metroid, Samus receives a distress signal from a nearby research station called the Bottle Ship. She decides to check it out. When she shows up, she runs into a small platoon of Galactic Federation soldiers who also answered the distress signal. Among them is Anthony Higgs, an old friend.
Remember me?
And Adam Malkovich, Samus's old commanding officer from the days when she wasn't doing freelance bounty hunting. She and the platoon run into a giant purple bug monster that almost kills them, and Adam's like, "Alright Samus, you can join us and help us figure out what's going on, but you have to do everything I tell you and not use any of your suit power-ups until I authorize them." And Samus is like, "Okay." So Adam has the entire gang split up, ultimately sending Samus to Sector 1, which is where the ship's biological research took place. They all reunite at this big research center where they discovered that the scientists were making biological weapons based on all the enemies from Super Metroid, and that's kind of illegal. A big purple lizard attacks the crew and kills one of the soldiers, and then runs off to Sector 3, the superheated area. Samus spends a good chunk of time looking for the big purple lizard, but Adam eventually redirects her to Sector 2, the cryo-freezer area, because Adam thinks there might be some scientists alive in there. She finds a woman in a lab coat, but the two of them are quickly attacked by one of the feds. Samus realizes that the Galactic Federation probably sent an assassin to clean up the operation once the investigation was finished, and dubs this traitor the Deleter. Adam tells Samus that the big purple lizard is still causing problems in Sector 3, so she should go there and kill it. While en route, the Deleter offs another soldier. Samus meets back up with Anthony, and they run into the big purple lizard, which it turns out is actually a clone of Samus's longtime nemesis Ridley. Samus goes into enough of a panic attack that Ridley has the time to seemingly kill Anthony. She then tries to fight Ridley off, but he escapes. Samus then realizes that Adam's been oddly quiet lately, and she seems to discover the Deleter making his way back to Sector 1. Samus follows him until she runs into the woman in the lab coat again, who introduces herself as Madeline Bergman, head of operations at the research facility. Madeline claims that the Federation's been cloning Metroids in a restricted zone called Sector 0, in addition to an artificial intelligence based on Mother Brain called MB, and Samus vows to head there and eliminate everything once and for all. Right before entering Sector 0, Samus is attacked by Adam, who decides to go into Sector 0 and destroy the Metroids and MB himself because he doesn't want Samus to die. Right before sacrificing himself, he orders Samus to find and kill the Ridley clone, look for another important survivor in Sector 1, and also tells Samus that Madeline Bergman can't be trusted. Then he walks into Sector 0, shuts the door, and dies. Samus heads back to Sector 1 and finds the corpses of not only another GF soldier, but also Ridley, weirdly. She stumbles into a red-headed woman who summons a Queen Metroid out of fear. After destroying the Queen, Samus confronts the woman and tells her that she's not going to hurt her, and the woman lays the entire story bare. She is the real Madeline Bergman, and the woman that Samus met earlier is actually an android housing MB. Just then, MB shows up with a mob of monsters, and another Galactic Federation platoon shows up at the same time, and there's a big wild shootout until Madeline kills MB. All the monsters conveniently die at the same time. The new GF platoon is about to take Madeline in for questioning before Anthony shows up alive, telling them that he has orders from Adam to rescue Madeline and keep her safe. The new GF CO allows this, and Anthony, Madeline, and Samus all leave the bottle ship and let the Federation clean up the mess. The end. No, wait, there's a post-credits playable epilogue where Samus goes back and grabs Adam's old helmet as a memento, but after that, yes, the end. That's the entire plot. Wait, no, it's not the entire plot. Throughout the story, we hear Samus deliver monologues about her backstory, in particular, her history in the Galactic Federation military and her old CO, Adam Malkovich. I'm going to boil it down for you in a much more concise way than Samus herself does in Other M. Samus used to be a soldier, and she saw Adam as a father figure, but Adam made a tough decision during an operation, and a frustrated Samus decided to leave the Federation and pursue independent bounty hunting. That's what happened. But in-game, Samus delivers that story over the course of several minutes and explains every single emotion that ran through her head in great detail. In fact, she does this extensively throughout the entire game. She practically explains to the audience every little thing that goes through her head during the entire adventure.
A lot of people complain about the monologues in Metroid Other M, and they're right. But, to say that it is a problem entirely of Metroid Other M's invention is not really being fair to it.
After all, Super Metroid opens with a big, long, unskippable monologue, and Samus also monologues a lot in Metroid Fusion. Fusion, by the way, also explored the relationship between Samus and Adam, and did so with internal Samus monologues. Both Fusion and Other M violate that great visual storytelling rule of show, don't tell, and by extension, the video game storytelling rule of do, don't show. And this is especially frustrating for Metroid fans because the Metroid franchise has always been a shining beacon of that axiom. Super Metroid opens with that giant monologue, but after that, the entire story is delivered through visuals and interactivity. Why do you think so many players are emotionally affected by the death of the baby Metroid at the end of Super? It's because they earned that moment, both visually and through gameplay. The baby attacks Samus at first, leaving her with only a sliver of health before realizing its tragic mistake and flying off in shame. That alone communicates so much to the player about how the baby feels through gameplay. Then, during the Mother Brain fight, it's such an awesome moment when the baby swoops in and saves Samus, but then it's such a bummer when it sacrifices itself. But then there's finally a bit of melancholic hope as you get the Hyper Beam and take Mother Brain down. That entire emotional roller coaster is constructed wholly out of interactive gameplay. I don't even have to joke about how Other M would bungle that scene up, because it does bungle that scene up at the beginning of the game. It's literally the game's introduction.
Thanks to the Hyper Beam, which was given to me somehow by the baby, I laid Mother Brain to waste.
It's like explaining a joke. You don't explain the joke because it's inherently funny. Having to explain the punchline kind of ruins the point of it. Similarly, why tell the audience how Samus feels when the developers can use the gameplay to make the player empathize with Samus? And to Other M's credit, they do that. Twice. First is this awesome moment.
Any objections, Adam?
Put a pin in that moment. We're going to get back to the whole Adam authorizing power-ups thing in a bit. But let's get to the other empathetic moment.
What? No, I didn't stutter. I'm about to defend the Ridley scene.
The Ridley scene is frustrating because it almost presents a vision of an alternate universe where Other M was halfway decent. In this scene, we see Samus freeze in terror at the sight of Ridley, who she rightly assumed was dead after Super Metroid. And you could have easily had Samus do another monologue about her history with Ridley, but she didn't. Samus's trauma is communicated entirely through visuals, almost wordlessly. And from what I understand, this checks out. People have shown this scene to people who actually have PTSD, and they respond to it in a way that suggests that Sakamoto and Team Ninja did their research. Samus's trauma is also something they explore more in depth in the Metroid manga that they released in 2002, and I highly recommend checking it out if you're interested. For those who haven't read it, it explores Samus's history with Ridley and the Chozo, and it goes into detail about how Ridley killed her parents in Homeworld, an event she never really got to come to terms with until her Zero mission. But in 2010, when Other M was released, Metroid fans had a visceral reaction to this scene. They hated seeing Samus in a position of emotional weakness. And I can understand that. I mean, when I was a kid, Samus Aran was right up there with Spider-Man and Luke Skywalker in the cool fictional role models club. A part of that is chronological consistency. Other M is the penultimate game in the Metroid timeline chronologically, and at this point in the Metroid canon, Samus has defeated Ridley 5 times by this point. And in the two previous encounters, I'm not counting Samus Returns because it's a weird remake of a game Ridley wasn't even in the first place, Samus didn't really have that much of a reaction to Ridley. But I'm willing to give that a pass, and I want to address the people who say that her PTSD reaction is inconsistent with the rest of the Metroid series, especially the set of people who think that Samus is a blank slate character, because she is not that.
Y'all weren't complaining about that back then.
To say that Samus is a blank slate character is to ignore a lot of important stuff in basically every Metroid game. Let me put it this way. Gordon Freeman is a blank slate character. We never see him aside from when he's holding a weapon, and even then he doesn't really exude much personality. Samus is a different story entirely. We can tell a lot about her just from her facial expressions and body language, And that's before she actually starts speaking in Metroid Fusion. Samus fears Ridley. She holds enough respect for the Chozo to mourn their death on Talon 4. She's friendly, but she plays off praise like it's no big deal. That being said, she holds regret whenever she can't protect someone, and when given the chance to fix her mistakes, even slightly, she takes it. And of course, we learn in Fusion that if the Federation is doing something shady, she's not afraid to stand up to them, though that's communicated through dialogue instead of visuals and gameplay. But it's still an example of Samus being a character, and it's consistent with the character that they build up to in the rest of the franchise. Now, here's where I think fans really got riled up in regards to Metroid Other M. You may have noticed that Samus's gender is basically a non-issue in regards to her character. Hell, the entire reason that she's a woman in the first place is because the game designers thought it would be a neat twist in an NES game. Even in Prime 3, where there's more of an emphasis on Samus's interactions with the Federation and the other bounty hunters, her gender is never really brought up. Admiral Dane, a stereotypical gruff military general type, still respects Samus like he would any other respected soldier or hunter. Other M changed all of that. Samus goes to the bottle ship in order to intercept a baby's cry type distress signal. Samus mourns the death of the baby and meets with Madeline Bergman, who was a mother figure to MB, who was modeled after Mother Brain. Do you get it now? Do you understand the symbolism that is being shoved in your face? Unlike previous games, Other M goes all in on the topic of Samus's gender and her role as a surrogate mother to the baby Metroid. And I will grant you, it doesn't do it well. But a lot of the vitriol I've seen seems to boil down to Samus has emotions, therefore she's ruined as a character. And I'm sorry, but you just implied that emotional vulnerability implies weakness as a character, and those implications are very, very troubling.
Alright, so I'm just gonna come out and say the thing. A lot of video gamers, particularly those who prefer Metroid to other Nintendo franchises, are overwhelmingly male and toxically masculine. Not all of them, not all of them, not all of them, don't click off the video, but a lot of them.
Samus's gender not being an issue in previous Metroid games probably helped some of this masculine audience connect with Samus because she's a tough intergalactic bounty hunter, and the video gaming community likes to latch on to female protagonists because they like having a character to shove in the faces of people who complain about gamer culture being overly masculine. So, as soon as Samus shows just a little bit of emotional vulnerability in Other M, fans start complaining about character assassination and the like because the image of Samus showing that vulnerability conflicts with masculine ideals of being tough and emotionless, which I guess some fans did see in Samus. That's why I don't see much to complain about in the Ridley scene. Samus should be able to show emotional vulnerability. I mean, if you were an intergalactic bounty hunter whose parents were brutally killed right in front of you, and your murderer just won't die, wouldn't you start to lose it after a while? We need to stop complaining when characters show that kind of behavior. Help, The Last Jedi just came out, and we're still having this discussion because of Luke Skywalker's new characterization. The audience reaction to Luke's new arc is nearly as visceral as the reaction to Other M's portrayal of Samus, if not more so. But we need to come to terms with the fact that these kinds of stoic character expectations are just not healthy. And honestly, in a game with as many issues as Other M fans, it's Samus's emotional trauma that you're complaining about? There are so many other issues that are worthy of criticizing instead of focusing on this one toxically masculine video game protagonist ideal of emotional stoicism. For example, the Adam authorizing items thing is far more troubling in terms of Samus's character than the Ridley scene ever could be. Hey, we haven't talked about that yet. Adam Malkovich is a prime example of gameplay overriding story and exposition. By all accounts, I should love this character. Hell, I did love this character back in Metroid Fusion, but Other M screws it all up because of one specific gameplay quirk. So normally in Metroid games, Samus starts without any of her trademark power-ups. In Super Metroid and Return of Samus, it's not explained how she lost them, but from Prime and Fusion onward, the developers came up with story excuses to rob her of her powers at the beginning of each game. Prime gives her a big concussion, Prime 2 has the Ing steal all of them, Prime 3 kind of dances around the issue, but you could make the argument that she left all of them on Ether at the end of the last game and whatever, and it's not important. No. Fusion has the X steal her power suit, so there's story reasons there. The excuse in Other M is that Samus never loses her power-ups, per se, but only decides to use them when Adam says it's okay.
It's really not the worst idea on paper, but they just spectacularly screw it up.
Here's the obvious example of how they screw it up. Adam sends Samus through the superheated Sector 3, but he doesn't authorize the Varia suit that has traditionally protected her from heat in previous games, and Samus doesn't turn it on. She runs through a hazardous environment basically naked just for the sake of following Adam's orders. I shouldn't have to explain how that bugs me. I shouldn't have to explain how it should bug you. It paints Samus as a dim-witted idiot that can't do anything unless her father figure tells her first. And it paints Adam as an unreasonable authority figure that Samus still latches onto almost like a child. Neither Samus nor Adam explicitly say anything about this, but the gameplay says it very clearly. And I don't know if it was intentional on the part of the dev team. I really hope it wasn't intentional on the part of the dev team. But in a video game narrative, information communicated through interactive gameplay trumps all other information. The information being telegraphed to the player, through the gameplay, is that Samus can't be trusted to activate even a set of protective armor to survive a hazardous environment unless her surrogate father figure okays it first. And that says some really unsettling things about Samus's character, Adam's character, and just Other M in general. See, now I can start throwing phrases like character assassination around, because Samus has a panic attack because the thing that killed her parents just won't die, is a lot more believable and fits Samus's character better than Samus puts her life in danger solely because Adam didn't explicitly say the words Varia suit is authorized. And this isn't just an isolated case in Sector 3. Many times Samus will go up against a boss and bumble against it until Adam says the magic words and suddenly we're allowed to use the tools to win. It isn't just insulting to Samus, but to the player too. It paints new power-ups in the disgusting new context of, wait, I had this power the whole time and I just couldn't use it, instead of, hey, a cool new ability to use and cherish for the rest of the game. Getting new abilities feels awful because of this, which is definitely not what you want your player to feel in a Metroid game. When Adam abruptly redirects you to other sectors while you're running around exploring, it reinforces that feeling. How is the player supposed to respect this character as Samus supposedly does when the gameplay almost makes it feel like he's just toying with you for the lulz? And let's unpin that
Any objections, Adam?
moment, because yes, it feels awesome when it happens. But I feel like it only works because the player already has so much contempt for Adam at this point in the game. And yet, as snarky as Samus is in this moment, the context is different from what the player feels. Adam has gone missing, maybe killed. For Samus, this isn't an act of defiance like the audience feels, but rather an act of simple logic. And when we get to that emotional scene where Adam sacrifices himself, the audience is still expected to have that respect for Adam, when in reality, it's just not there anymore. Adam's death isn't earned, because the gameplay has unintentionally reinforced the idea that we hate Adam Malkovich. The Any Objections Adam scene is amazing, but it still works against the game as a whole. So we have a control scheme that holds the player's hand, a story dominated by monologues and internal dialogue, an extremely linear world map, and gameplay mechanics that suggest that Samus can't even basically function without the support and authorization of male authority figures. This game fundamentally misunderstands what makes the Metroid series special. Previous Metroid games relied on subtle, gameplay-fueled interactive storytelling, even in the games that were relatively linear. They presented to their audience a female protagonist that could do her job and do it well, without people constantly reminding her that her gender makes her fragile, without letting her traumatic past make her weak. Metroid Other M spits on that legacy. It isn't a complete disgrace, there are spatterings of a more intelligent narrative here and there, but they're drowned out by systems, mechanics, and aesthetics that, intentionally or not, submerge the franchise in a layer of filth that it has trouble washing out to this day. And even though Nintendo would shelve the Metroid franchise for 6 years, they'd still continue to trot out Other M's iteration of Samus in games like Smash Bros. As a bitter reminder of what they published, almost as if to rub more salt on the wound.
Yes, I understand that Nintendo's probably not being intentionally malicious about this. They wouldn't have greenlit this project if they didn't have at least a little faith in it. But even so, I would argue that it stands as the single darkest and most disgusting smear on their legacy as a company. I don't think I've ever seen another work of media that so thoroughly misunderstands the appeal of a property, that disgraces its franchise in the public eye so much that a new Metroid announcement is not so much greeted with fanfare anymore as it is with wariness and caution.
Like, even the Zelda CDI games haven't tarnished Zelda that badly. Batman v Superman came pretty close to tarnishing DC's legacy, but Wonder Woman was able to claw that brand out of the grave. This is what I mean when I say that Metroid Other M is bad on another level. That it's not just merely incompetently made, but rather offends popular culture with its mere existence. And I didn't even get to the other minor nitpicks, like how the Deleter subplot never gets resolved, or how its ugly art direction is compared to the rest of the Metroid series, as The Simpsons Hit and Run is to the TV show it's based on.
Other M is a cultural catastrophe that Nintendo is still recovering from to this day. Why do you think that they've waited 7 years to announce a new Metroid game that isn't a remake or a spin-off? This game is likely a mistake that Nintendo is carefully making sure never happens again. Samus Returns was a decent return to form, but we still have yet to see if Metroid Prime 4 is in good hands. And yes, I understand that creative risks do need to be taken in this industry. That's how we advance, that's how we get better games as the years go on. But at the same time, you need to take calculated risks. You need to take careful risks. And the decisions that were made in Metroid Other M do not feel like calculated or careful risks. The decisions that Sakamoto and Team Ninja made in Other M damn near killed the franchise, and it really definitely resulted in what I would consider to be the worstest game.